Today on the 1012 podcast, we begin our series of pre-recorded conversations with people I really like talking Big 12 football. Today, from CBS Sports, Shehan Jeyarajah. You should know him, but in case you don't, one of the best voices when it comes to Big 12 sports and national coverage. He's going to join us to talk about his post-spring Big 12 rankings, but we're going to tier these things up, baby. Talk about all 16 teams. Now, as I mentioned, these are going to be pre-recorded, so obviously lots of things are happening in relation to college sports that have happened since we recorded this interview. So if we make some comment about, the House settlement, which is now done, understand this was recorded before that was done. Are we going to address the House settlement? Yes. I will get an interview for that sometime in the near future. And of course, we'll have our last episode of the 1012 softball show coming up shortly. Had some issues scheduling that. So we're going to want to make sure you had some Big 12 coverage throughout the offseason. Plenty of things that we're still going to talk about. Plenty of things I want to talk about. But for today, absolutely fantastic interview with our great friend, Shehan Jeyarajah. So do yourself a favor, stick around, and enjoy that starting now.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. You're the flagship show, the 1012 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com. Of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Philip Slavin. Thank you for joining us for the off season, because in college sports, there's less of an off season every single year. Shehan, our guest today, Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports, who I don't think needs any introduction, but every podcast is someone's first. And, every day a new college football fan is born. So there might be someone out here who doesn't know who he is. I don't know of a Big 12 fan who doesn't or shouldn't. Shehan, welcome as always to the podcast. I want to start with the idea of, Shehan, there used to be a clear off season in college football. It doesn't feel like there's one anymore, is there?
Well, I think that at least when the portal closes in early May, then you're okay, the on-field stuff is mostly put away for a moment. But now we got all of this off-field stuff that just keeps going and going and going. And by the way, that includes conference meetings, right? The SECs, the Big 12s are at the end of May. This is all going on right now. So there's constant movement. Obviously, recruiting has always been part of the calendar that gets into June and all of that. And before you know it, you're into July all over again. And there's media days and conferences and we're back into it. So I will say, people ask me all the time, well, you cover college football, but what do you do, the rest of the year? It's getting easier to answer that question than it ever has before.
Yeah, between even when the game itself is on pause, the business of college sports as a whole is now unending. And college football even as much as college football drives the money. It's just there's no downtime. There's always something out there. It feels like the need for off-season filler is almost less and less. Yes, we still want our give us our coach rankings, give us our each team's best season since the 50s, whatever each platform, podcast, outlet needs to do to keep things going through the off season, like this episode here. Go for it. But it feels like as far as covering the sport itself, there's a whole lot less need to create content out of history or clicks because there's always something happening. And I cannot imagine, I don't see an end to that anywhere. Even if you figure out the portal or you figure out NIL or you figure out paying players and the house settlement stuff, it always feels like there's going to be something. There's always going to be something because the sport doesn't like to get ahead of everything. It likes to be drug kicking and screaming, or at least the leaders of this sport. I used leaders in air quotes. Leaders of this sport like to be drug kicking and screaming into change and into the future. And so as long as it maintains that, there's always going to be something to talk about now.
No, I agree. And like, the thing is too, right? Like, we are in this moment now where obviously there's playoff expansion. Obviously, in the short term, there's going to be, with the Pac-12 and Mountain West are still realignment further on. Obviously we're talking about television contracts and the system and all this sort of stuff. And so, and look, I think for me, right, like there always is a piece of me that wants to not center that stuff over the actual games and over the actual athletes. And so in the medium term, because I don't think this will be resolved in the next 6 months by any means, like I hope that we are able to get a little further back to meeting the people, meeting the places, meeting the guys coming in, building stars, things like that, doing it over the course of multiple years. But again, that's what makes this both a very exciting time in college athletics and covering it, but also a very, very difficult one as you just kind of try to figure out what normal might look like.
Yeah, I don't. That word doesn't apply. Not that it's always been chaotic. That's one of the fun things about college football. But now it's reached a different level. And I think I've reached the point where I've stopped trying to argue with people who are like, college football, it's broken. I'm like, it's not that it's broken, but I can completely understand the viewpoint of someone who finds everything outside of a game day on Saturday to be exhausting and frustrating. Because it does, part of this whole never-ending thing is it's not never-ending fun. It's not like, the NFL's offseason. Yeah, but we're excited about the new players and we're getting fantasy football and we're talking about this and this. No, we're having these conversations of like, I don't even know who's on the roster anymore. Like I forget the incoming freshman class. I'm so excited to learn about it. It's the freshmen and the transfer portals and is somebody still there and what are we going to talk about? Who's getting paid? And I can't believe this play. It just feels like the off season is a whole lot less fun than it used to be. And when it feels like everything or most of the things outside of the actual Saturday game day just feel like they can't ever stay set. I get why some fans get frustrated about where things are right now. And it's hard for me to argue that.
Well, and I think that the one piece to me that I really hope, again, changes in the short to medium term is, like, if you're a fan right now, like, spring ball probably had less juice this year than any year I can ever remember. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest reasons for that is because everybody knows that the roster could change so fundamentally in the spring portal window. And so, like, you almost can't pay attention or don't pay attention to spring ball because, like, actually you won't know until, like, August who's actually on your football roster. And that's definitely a piece that I hope changes. I hope that we're able to gain more long-term clarity. Because, look, I mean, obviously we were for so long in such an anti-player market where obviously, they weren't getting compensated. They didn't have enough freedom of movement. But, like, also there's no sport on the planet where you have perpetual free agency. That's not obviously long-term something that makes a lot of sense either. So, look, this is obviously always going to be driven a little bit by wishful thinking. But I hope that in these next couple of months and years, everybody's kind of able to come together and say, look, it's great that short-term opportunities are available to people, but to build something a little bit more lasting, we do have to be a little bit more long-term thinking as well.
The pendulum and its extremes, it had been in one extreme for so long. It's not really shocking that it swung to the other extreme and it seems to be stuck there. You're never going to get a perfect middle ground, but if we could get that swing to be a little less insane, I think we'd all be. I think everyone would be a little bit happier, and even I think to some extent, players who, I think this is I think we just look at it like, these players are ruining things. They're so greedy and they can't be happy with. It's chaotic for them too. Like, it's not like it shouldn't be us against them, no matter. And I feel like conversations get that way a lot of times, even with the way coaches talk about how things are. They may not say it's the players, but the way they talk about all these problems feels like it's still pointed at the kids. And it's like, this is chaotic for them too. Okay.
Yeah.
It is for everyone.
The thing that I'd also just point to is, like, we always notice when X player jumps in the portal and gets $2 million. We don't notice when a kid who is making $120,000 gets his NIL cut to $30,000 and told you can either take it or leave. Right? Like, that happens constantly with guys who are in the middle or the end of the roster. And so,
I think way more so than the guy who went in because he's going to get a payday. Like, we focus on the amount of coverage of one kid having this happen versus the amount of coverage versus 100 kids of what's happening to them.
Right.
It just sways and impacts how we view this stuff.
100%. And so, long term, again, everybody is going to benefit when we have more clear terms and when we have more clear, again, binding contracts, both for players and for teams, right? Like, I think that that's the sort of thing that long term we're going to just need to see more of. And again, by the time this episode comes out, hopefully we'll finally have a house agreement, right? Like, hopefully we're not still sitting here waiting for, a legal precedent to come down. But, that's at least the hope, right? And talking to people over at the NCAA, that's their hope. That at least can set a foundation. And more needs to be built on top of it, and more needs to be done, and some of this stuff will have to be defended in court. But at least we can start that process once House v. NCAA comes down.
Well, this is not what we brought you on for specifically, but it's good to have these conversations. And sometimes it's just nice to see you and to chat about this stuff, because I feel like the only time we get to is when we're recording a podcast most of the time, because you are a busy man. You are a very busy man who is always willing to take whatever's thrown at him, because you are, like I say this all the time, as far as voices in the Big 12, you're one of the best, and the Big 12 needs more great voices, and it's a thrill to have you representing this conference as a Baylor alum. Y'all non-Baylor fans, don't hold it against him. But we brought you here today specifically because you recently posted your post-spring Big 12 power rankings. And so we're going to talk about that here. I want to go through some of these and have an overview of kind of the Big 12, because I'll start with Arizona State specifically, because you have them sitting at number one. And I think that's fair. Just looking at, let's take all the Big 12 context out of it, I think that's fair to say that Arizona State, given what they achieved last year, given what they returned this year, which is, I think, according to Bill Connolly's returning production, like number 2 in the country. So they're bringing a ton back. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I have said, personally, I'm not going to pick Arizona State to repeat because that's not what happens in the Big 12. And I have Arizona State fans who've come and said, like, have kind of argued and pushed back on that thought. And I get it. And so some of this conversation is going to sound very familiar to fans of Big 12 schools that have been in this conference for a while. And I think for those of schools like Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, this is a conversation you just get familiar with, of the Big 12 is the conference of chaos. And look, maybe it's going to change over the next 5-10 years because we have this new 16-team conference and things are always different. It's not the conference it used to be. But I until I actually see that shift occur, I have data since 2017, really, that says to me, outside of Oklahoma's dominance, this is a conference of development. This is a conference that goes through developmental cycles. This is a conference that goes up and down. Teams have variance up and down. You have teams that tend to trend toward the top of the conference and teams that tend to trend toward the bottom. But we have enough data at this point for me to sit here and say, like, if I take that out of the context, I get it. Arizona, preseason number 1, with everything they bring back except for Cam Scatterbo, which is a big piece. But if you bring the Big 12 history into that for the last 7-8 years, I have a hard time putting anybody who won the conference the previous season at number 1 heading into the next year.
Well, and there's a couple pieces of this, right? One, you mentioned it. Since 2017, there have been 8 Big 12 title games, 7 times. There's been a brand new participant in that game. And I believe that Oklahoma is the only team to do it in back-to-back years, like at any point. So it's really, really hard to reach the Big 12 title game in the first place. And that was in a 10-team league up until 2022. Now it's a 16-team league. Just mathematically, it's going to be a lot harder, even if, by the way, you have an 8-1 season or a 7-2 type season. That might have been enough to get you there in a lot of years. So, with Arizona State at number 1, like when I cast my ballot for Big 12 standings for the preseason poll, I'm probably not going to have Arizona State number 1. But, this is a power rankings, first of all, right? So you do have to take into account where they're coming from. And where they're coming from was the team that was clearly the best in the conference in 2024 and obviously dominated their way to the college football playoff. And the other piece, too, right, is like you said, they returned so much of their key production. Arizona State, in a lot of ways, like, they arrived a year early. This was a team that was more supposed to peak in 2025, not 2024. Now, of course, the emergence of Cam Skattebo was a big part of that because of just how good he was. But the rest of this roster has a lot of key players back. Sam Leavitt is probably going to be the first team all Big 12 quarterback. He's, one of 2 or 3 who I think really, really kind of have established themselves at the top of the group. They bring in some really good pieces at running back, by the way. Raleek Brown is a player who's been there a couple of years. Kanye Udo transfers in from Army. And defensively, like CJ Fight at defensive tackle, Xavier Alford in the secondary. Like, these are the best players from their 2024 team, except for Skattebo. So it would be disappointing to me if they aren't in that top group. And I use that phrase very specifically. This is a conference that's more going to be groups and tiers than it necessarily is going to be individual teams. There's not 1 or 2 teams that are going to really, I think, stand apart from the field. If I had to guess, I think that we're maybe looking at 4 or 5 being in that top group, and Arizona State will be among them.
I love that you said that. I kind of hate ranking the Big 12. And I know that sounds late. I know it's a lazy thing, right? Like, you need to be able to, like, no, because then as soon as you do that, that's all anyone cares about. You can't have a conversation about it. It was like, well, you put them third behind this team and this team, so you think that they're that, like, no, like the difference between 1 and 4, 1 and 5, we could be talking like decimal points here.
and by the way, last year 4 teams tied for first place in the Big 12 at 7-2, right? So like even Arizona State and Iowa State making it, now they were of course very deserving teams, was kind of just math. Was kind of just, this is how it worked out for them. They could have been equally as good as they were, and the decimal places could have just gone a little bit the wrong direction. Yeah,
like and that's going to happen in conferences. It's going to happen in conferences where you don't have divisions. But that's with the unbalanced schedules, and you don't know who you're going to play, and the volatility of the Big 12. But I want to kind of go through that real quick before we dive into some of these teams. You mentioned it, 8 different teams since the title game came back, had with someone making a first-time appearance every year except 2023, when Texas and Oklahoma State, who had already been in it before, not the year prior, but previously. Since OU's streak of 4 straight titles from 2017 to 2020, no team has made back-to-back appearances in the title game, let alone back-to-back wins. Okay, the biggest thing to me is you look at the teams. We're going to set Oklahoma aside, and we're going to set 23 Texas, since they joined the SEC the following year, aside. You look at these teams who made it into the title game. Here's where they finished the following season: 5th, 3rd, 9th, 4th, 6th, 5th, 5th, 10th, 16th. Like, it's not like, well, they were right. They were 3rd. Oh, they were so, no, they were all over. Again, one team finished 3rd. It was Texas in 2019. Otherwise, you got a 4th, 3/5, a 6th, a 9th, a 10th, and a last place, that obviously being Oklahoma State last year after their ridiculous fall. So it's too hard to sit here and be like, well, they're going to do it again. We have teams that, they lost a lot. Sometimes they brought quite a bit back. I mean, we look at Iowa State from 2020, and we can point to COVID. They were 4th the next year. Oklahoma State makes the title game. We're like top 10 in returning production. They didn't win a conference game the next season, right? And so you look at this stuff and say, it's just so hard in the Big 12 because there's not a team that just dominates from a recruiting standpoint. It comes down to who does have more talent, who does have better coaching, and who's got players who either landed from the transfer portal that we didn't expect, Cam Scatabo, or how good are they at developing guys to fill in the spots of players they lost. And it's just, those are the things that are just so hard to figure out nowadays.
And I'd add schedule too, is a huge part of it.
I learned 2 years ago, we talk about strength of schedule from a preseason context to have these conversations, but once the season starts, throw that out. Doesn't matter. Okay. I'm breaking them down based off of SP Plus rankings right now. I'm working on that. And I know for a fact that this is an exercise in futility, because was it 2 years ago when West Virginia had what we thought was the most difficult schedule in the Big 12? It's why I had picked them to finish last. Lots of people picked them to finish last. And then they had a way better season. Why? Because their schedule went from the toughest in the Big 12 to one of the easiest in the Big 12 because we were so wrong on our expectations for the teams that they faced that season. And so there's just, because of the volatility of the conference, all these conversations we're having is it's just, welcome to the Big 12. This is what it is every year. Be frustrated. And it's pay attention to the teams who have either some consistency of the ability to stay in contention, or who can we try and pick to be that team from preseason rank low, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to could be here, like an Arizona State who went from picked last to finish first, because that makes so much sense in this conference. Only in the Big 12. Only in the Big 12 does that happen. It doesn't even happen in the MAC, y'all. Okay? Only in the Big 12 conference.
Well, the Big 12 doesn't have a Kent State, to be fair.
That's, yeah. We used to, but Kansas is no longer a meme, which is an excellent thing for Kansas and the Big 12. So looking at this, you said you think you have about 4 or 5 teams. Where do you feel like, I'm gonna kind of read through the top half of your teams. I want you to tell me where your tier 1 at this point drops off. You've got Arizona State 1, Texas Tech 2, BYU 3, Baylor 4, Kansas State 5, TCU 6, Iowa State 7, and Kansas at 8. That's the top half of the conference standings for you. Where do you feel like that tier 1 line stops?
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
So I think the top 4 to me are clearly, to me, in that top group. I think that Kansas State is kind of that swing team where they're right on the cusp of being a 1 to 2. You know, some of that depends obviously on the development of Avery Johnson, who showed a lot of great stuff in his first season and also had some really miserable games as well. I expect him to take a step forward, of course, in a really, really good developmental program. Some of it comes down to, can they be as good as they were last year on the defensive side of the ball after losing one of the best defensive linemen in the Big 12? Will they continue to be as good on the offensive line as they were last year? Do they have pass catchers who are going to come in and take a step forward? So, like, they just have a few more questions than I would like. When I look at this top 4 group, right, and look, there's a really good chance that one of these top 4 are going to end up somewhere around 10th or 11th when the season actually comes to be.
Absolutely.
There's a pretty good chance, but obviously we talked about Arizona State. I think that BYU is just such an undervalued program. I think one thing that happened with BYU is they went 5-7 the year they transitioned into the Big 12. And so people just forgot that they won 9 games a year for essentially the last half decade before that under Kalani Sitake, and then obviously go 11-2 last year. And to me, we're probably the second best team in the Big 12 last year and just didn't get some math going their way. Mm-hmm. And they also return a lot. Now, obviously, by the time you hear this, maybe the Jake Retzlaff situation will be resolved. Obviously, that's something that's hanging over everything right now and make me not feel quite as good about it. But offensively, again, like, I think that Chase Roberts is a big time receiver. I think that LJ Martin at running back is one of the most underrated players in the Big 12 if he can stay healthy. They bring back a lot on defense as well, and a really, really good defense last year, one of the best pass defenses in the country. I think they'll be there at the end of the year. Texas Tech obviously has had the best offseason of anybody in America, most likely, with bringing in the number one transfer class in the country, along with a roster that already returned a good amount, and two really, really good coordinator hires in Mac Leftwich on offense and Shia Woods on defense. So, like, it's a lot to ask of them to be in that top 4 group, but that's the expectation next year with the amount of talent that they bring in. Baylor is obviously a really interesting one because they finished the year on a 6-game Big 12 winning streak. They obliterate Kansas in their last game. I think that, obviously we mentioned Sam Leavitt, but I think that Sawyer Robertson is his top competition for best quarterback in the Big 12. And, for them to take the step towards conference contender, it's going to come on defense, if they're able to grow in the secondary with a couple of new, really interesting coaches coming in. But like, this is a roster, especially on offense, that should be, maybe the best in the Big 12 with Bryson Washington, Sawyer Robertson, Jake Spavital, 4 offensive linemen coming back. And look, we haven't seen year-to-year consistency from Dave Aranda teams. That's probably the biggest red flag, but I think that this is kind of the moment where they go from being a team that was 1 game away from playing for the Big 12 to maybe one who has a chance to get back and have a chance to win it.
The thing with Baylor to me is the fact that they figured out Sawyer Robertson was the right guy, finally. Yeah. I think is huge for them. And I think having one of the best quarterbacks, and I think the Big 12, whereas last year we had a lot of questions about quarterback in this conference, this year I feel really good about the depth of quarterbacks in the Big 12. And so I do think that gives Baylor an edge. Obviously, Retzlaff is a big conversation with BYU. And at any other school, and that's not a shot at those schools, but just at any other school, I would call it a 50-50 right here and now and have no idea which way this is going to go. With it being BYU and what he is accused of and their code of conduct there, I have a really hard time seeing him playing this season. And so one of these teams is going to end up in the bottom half of the conference. Man, you lose your starting quarterback. I don't care how much time you have to prep. Like, that's gonna hurt. And so if there's a team that we think could have a really good season or expect to have a good season that doesn't, that's the team I'm circling. For the obvious reason of if you don't have Jake Retzlaff, we could talk about the talent of backup quarterbacks. Everyone loves backup quarterbacks. It's the mystery box. You could have the car, or you could check behind the curtain and it could be a car.
And I'll say too, right? Like, as a pure talent, like Jake Retzlaff isn't especially special in this conference, but he is just, as a dual threat player, somebody who's able to take advantage of those little moments, right? Mm-hmm. Who's able to run for 4 yards when it's 3rd and 4, somebody who's able to make the right decision. And if you don't have that, and I believe that their potential starter, if that happens, would be a Utah State transfer, right? It's Cooper Legis, I think, is the kid who came over. Like, it's just not the same, right? Like, it's just not the same. And, I think that, like, obviously BYU has a lot of really talented players, and I expect that they'd still have a decent season, but he kind of is a swing player for them with the way that their offense is structured. So, again, if I made this power rankings again, knowing that Jake Retzlaff wouldn't be there, it's harder to have BYU in that top group, but for now, at least, they're my number 3.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm good with your cutoff. The consistency of Kansas State is one of the few things in this conference that I, at this point, trust. Even with all they've lost on defense. And you have 54% returning production. I think Connolly had 63. It's still, we're talking about roughly half of that defense from last year being gone. Kansas State fans, I'm tired of arguing with you. I'll give you this. They find guys. It's one of the few programs where they are able to keep guys around, and they're so good at development. And so I would lean towards them in a tier 1 because I would be shocked if they're not in contention.
Sure.
Late into the season.
I think the thing that's always complicated, right, is like, because Kansas State, like, their floor, this is incredible, is like being an 8-win team, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
The question is, right, like, is there consistency being 8-9 or is it being 10-11?
Yes.
And that's where you get into the conference contention. Because, like, last year, I mean, that was a disappointing season for Kansas State, right? It's a transitional season. And, like, that's incredible, right? To have that level of consistency. You know, I think that one thing that just big picture talking about the Big 12 that you have to get into is kind of like growth timelines, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you bring guys back, like I would say it was a perfect example of that last year. You have all these upperclassmen in the secondary, at receiver, on the offensive line. And so like a roster that's pretty good becomes great because all these guys have played together a lot. Now, Kansas State has set a much higher floor for itself than anybody else, but it's not necessarily the culmination year for Kansas State in terms of how their roster is built. Now, it is at certain position groups. It is, you know, again, at quarterback, you got a second-year guy. I think Dylan Edwards is going to be really good at running back. You know, Jace Brown back at receiver. Like, they have lots of pieces. It's going to be interesting to see if they can kind of meld them all together. That's really a big question for me.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Okay, so I read through the rest of the top half: TCU, Iowa State, Kansas. I'm going to read a few more down, and I want you to tell me where your tier 2 cuts off. Number 9 is Utah. Number 10, Colorado. 11, Cincinnati. 12, West Virginia. I can't imagine tier 2 goes past that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, this is also, I think, a really interesting one. So I think that Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, Kansas are definitely in my tier 2. I think that that's sort of the hard or the soft cutoff. Once again, we kind of have a swing team there, and that's Utah. So Utah, obviously a team last year picked to win the Big 12, have just miserable quarterback injuries. Their offense is a disaster. So here's the one thing, right? Jason Beck coming in from New Mexico. I don't think that this offense has any chance of being as bad as it was the last 2 years. I don't know if it'll be good, but like the last 2 years, like, oh my Lord, it was like just... I don't know how Utah fans watched that for some of these games, right? Because everything was built around having this veteran dual threat quarterback, and instead you had a walk-on pig farmer and a freshman, right? So like, it's just, and I say that with love, but like,
no, it's incredible. It's great.
Yeah, and so now you have Devin Dampier coming in. I also think that they have a much deeper quarterback room than what they have had in many years. And, you know, I wrote about it last year. Like, I think it was a failure by Kyle Whittingham and his staff to not be more prepared for even just the idea that Cam Rising could get hurt again. I think they've done that this year. They've got, I think, a quarterback room that you feel a little better about. You know, Devin Dampier obviously coming over with Jason Beck from New Mexico. Isaac Wilson is back, which I think is a huge deal. And I believe they added one more transfer as well. So like they've got, I think, more playable quarterbacks in that room, which is a big deal. Defensively, like, you can set your watch to them, right? Like they are kind of like the standard in college football the past couple of years for what they do on defense. And I think that their offense won't be bad. I don't know if it'll be good, but I don't think it's going to be bad. I don't think it's going to hold them back. And so again, they're a team that I think has real upside. And so that probably means that they belong in tier 2, but like the downside's still there too. Like they could easily be one of these teams that just things don't work or Devin Dampier gets hurt and it just spirals from there. So I think that again, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, Kansas, those are locks to be in tier 2. And Utah, once again, is kind of that swing team.
I think with Utah, it's does the impact of this air quotes being Whittingham's likely last season. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
The coach in waiting was not named because he's going to be the coach in waiting for 5 years. Like, I think Whittingham just doesn't want to go out on last year's terms.
I don't know. Ask Will Muschamp about that one.
Yeah, I know. I think had Utah had a successful season last year, he'd be done, but he does not want to leave what the program did last year as his final goodbye. And that's fine. You want to set the guys that you've coached from a staff standpoint, these guys you've had for a long time. You want to, especially your next head coach, your DC who's been there forever, you want to set him up for success moving forward. And so it makes sense to be like, let's just get this back on track from what happened. And then I can go right off into the sunset in a positive way. So it's really interesting to see what impact that has, being this like worst kept secret in all of college football. It's interesting Kansas State, TCU, the up and down the last 3 seasons, which just feels like TCU during the last, decade. Iowa State, because of how much they lost, I mean, absolutely. And then Kansas. Kansas, to me, is where we start talking about what I consider true like wild cards for the Big 12 this year. New offensive coordinator, or a different offensive coordinator for the third year in a row. Jalen Daniels is back, not coming off of an injury that makes us question how healthy he'll be coming into the season. Obviously didn't mesh with the offensive coordinator last year. Yes, they lose quite a bit from last year, but you still have a Kansas team that I think maybe have gotten the offensive coordinator position right this time. With Jalen Daniels as the wild card, and I'm not going to do the whole like they should be a contender because of Jalen Daniels, but Jalen Daniels is still a wild card. This is where I start my list of like team picked in mid to back half of the preseason poll that we should actually look at and say might be this year. This might be the year for that team. Where are you on Kansas at this point?
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Sports are all about teamwork, and so is insurance. Whether you need an in-person or digital assist, State Farm is there to help you choose the right coverage for your home, car, and more. Get a game plan that helps fit your life and talk to State Farm today. State Farm with the assist. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability and eligibility vary by state.
No, I think that's all fair, especially on offense. Obviously, they lose a lot of guys who have been major contributors for them. And, I'd say that running back is probably like, they're not going to have another Devin Neal, right? No. Like, Devin Neal's one of the best players in the Big 12 over the past couple of years. But if they can fill that position well enough, and I mean, Daniel Highshot's been that guy at times for them. Like, I think that we saw the rust that Jalen Daniels was working through the first half of the season. I expect without that rust, hopefully, we get more of kind of the Jalen Daniels we've been expecting for the past couple of years. Now, that's a dangerous statement to make because we've been expecting it for many years. But, like, I also think that, like, we saw it. We saw him take that step. We saw how he could fit in this system. I think that one of the, great things about the Jeff Grimes experience at Kansas last year was, like, their offensive line, because he's an offensive line coach by trade, really took a step forward. And, they turned Logan Brown, who was kind of a cast-off, into an NFL draft pick. They turned Bryce Foster, who was kind of a cast-off from Texas A&M, into a really good center who I expect to be on the short list of guys to maybe make all Big 12 in the preseason. So, like, I think that this offense looks good, looks ready, and now it's going to come down to development on the defensive side of the ball. They've continued to add talent there, and that's kind of the story of this Kansas team, is you're trading experience for, I think, a little bit more in pure athletic talent. Like at receiver is a great example of that. They had all these fifth-year guys last year. They're all gone, but they've got guys who are really dynamic, potentially. And I think on defense, you lose Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson, two really good players in the secondary, but you get some athletes back there who I think maybe have a chance to take a step forward. So this is definitely a boomer bust type team. Like, I think that there is the potential that they get up to the 9-10 win plateau. But, like, again, there's also a chance that all these guys whiff. But if I had to guess, like, I think this is going to be a team that's certainly back in a bowl game after, obviously, a one-year hiatus last year. And, again, like, this is a staff that you just trust. Obviously, it didn't come through last year, but I do think that when you look at the pieces, when you look at the situations they were in, when you look at how close, how many of those losses were, like, I think it's something that should give you a lot of optimism that this could be a potential buy low team.
All right, so let's talk about tier 3. You mentioned that starts at Utah. I assume you have 4 tiers, not 5, right?
Yeah, 4 tiers.
Okay.
About.
All right. So I'm gonna make a guess here. Or at least let me put it this way. I will tell you where my tier 3 would end based off of your rankings. Obviously, if it starts at Utah at 9, you have Colorado 10, Cincinnati 11, West Virginia 12, Houston 13. That's where I would draw the line. Yeah, I'm right about there. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about the bottom 3 here in a minute, but when I get to Houston and what Willie Fritz was able to do last year, and I just say it's year 2.
Yeah.
I think they were ahead of schedule in year one. It is a new team still. It's not just we brought last year's team back. They are 20th in returning production. But I would have a hard time looking at this team and going like, they're not going to make progress in year two. This is Willie Fritz we're talking about at a Power 5 school. I think they're going to take a step forward. So I absolutely think they should be in a tier 2. I'm not going to do like, hey, it's another year 2 head coach who turns this team around quick. That'd be way ahead of schedule, just like Arizona State last year. But I feel like that's a good point. The one I would question here is West Virginia.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's fair. Honestly, even going through it now, I was kind of like, I don't know if I feel as good about West Virginia at 12. Here's the thing, right? Like, there's a lot of things that go into whenever you're putting together a power ranking, and I think that one piece of it that goes into it is not wanting to get yelled at, and I think that I understand. Like, a lot of West Virginia fans would be like, why would we be behind Houston necessarily? Houston wasn't very good last year, but I think that if I did it again, I might switch those teams. What West Virginia, and the way that I define this tier 3 is like teams that like almost anything could happen, right? Like there is absolutely the possibility of I don't know if any of these 4 necessarily could jump all the way to like contention, but like I think that like any of the 4 of these teams have the ability to knock off one of the top teams. Like, I think that that's where you kind of have to view it. You mentioned obviously with Houston, defensively, they're in a really good spot, even after losing their defensive coordinator. And then offensively, like, I think this is a team that could take a huge step forward in year 2. Connor Wegman coming in, and look, I'm not sitting here saying that Connor Wegman's this perfect 5-star quarterback, right? Like, I'm not saying that, but I think that he will fit Willie Fritz a lot better than he fit certainly Jimbo Fisher. And then I think that that also he'll be in a little bit of a better situation than he was under Colin Klein. Like, I just don't know that was an ideal fit skill set wise. And I think that at Houston, he'll have the ability to be mobile, but not need to be a runner, to be decisive, but not have to make too many reads. Like, I think it's a good situation for him. And then, you obviously talk about Colorado and Cincinnati as well. Cincinnati has, I think, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the Big 12 in Brendan Sorsby, somebody who really, I think, has popped in a big way. They've continued, I think, to do a good job at the running back position. Receiver is a little bit more of an issue for me, but defensively is really where this team needs to take a step forward. And I think the other piece too, and the one thing, if you're looking for some optimism for Cincinnati, is like, they have failed most, and by the way, I think it's a little bit of an indictment on the head coach, but like, they've failed in the intangibles most, right? In situational football, they've allowed third down conversions, they've allowed middle 8 points, like they've obviously collapsed in big spots, of that Pitt game being chief among them last year, right? So like, this is where I think that Cincinnati has the ability to maybe jump up, is because like, I don't think that this team is that far away from being pretty good. Now, again, I have questions about whether this coaching staff is going to get them over that humps, but I do think that they deserve to at least be there. And then, Colorado obviously is just such a total wild card right now. They've got 2 quarterbacks that you feel good about, but they also lose almost everything about how this team was structured last year. So they're going to be a really interesting one to kind of watch over the course of the next few months.
Cincinnati, to me, you're right on Brendan Sorsby. And I remember me talking about him with Chase Kitty before last year. And by week 3, we were both like, we were wrong on Brendan. Like, we apologize. We were wrong. Give me some Brendan Sorsby stock. And it's funny. I have never liked the Satterfield hire, and nothing about the first 2 years in Cincinnati has led me to change my opinion on that. This feels like a roster and a team that if you put in a good head coach, they're Big 12 contenders.
Sure.
Or at least a really good dark horse wildcard team.
Sure.
Because I don't trust Satterfield to make sure that they don't somehow screw a game up that they should win. Because I mean, that last year, the last year's the number of close games, the number of games you're just like, how has this gone this direction? And I put so much of that on him and his coaching staff. I think this is I actually think there's talent. Like, I think they've done a good job of rebuilding this roster from what Luke Fickell left them, which wasn't much. But I don't trust them in game to not screw it up. And so, like, I want to say that the Cincinnati Bearcats in 2025 are a Big 12 dark horse, but like, I can't. It's like that three-headed dragon where like two are scary and one's a goober, and the goober is just Scott Satterfield.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I'll be honest, like, since Scott Satterfield left, I almost feel like I just can't get a handle on, like, Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, you know, like, usually you kind of, and I think a lot of it is identity driven, right? Like, usually you feel like a team has an identity, you know what you're going to get from them. There's no logic necessarily to Cincinnati's last 2 years, right? Like, there's no guiding philosophy. They don't necessarily just play a certain way or want a certain thing or any of that sort of stuff. But, like, you also start looking at their roster and you're just like, oh, I like that player. Oh, I like that player. I think that's a pretty good position group. I think that's a pretty good position group. You look at the stats. A lot of them are like, okay, well, they weren't like amazing, but they were a top half Big 12 team and this and this and this and this and this and this. And you're just kind of like, I don't know how you add all those things together and it just like doesn't work, but it keeps not working, right? And so, again, that one of two things can come out of that, right? Either one, those like little things just click as the team gets more experience, which is definitely possible. Or like you said, the staff is just not able to get that out of them. So I'm fascinated by them this year. Like, again, I have them in my, they should be able to pop and beat a good team. And they haven't done that the past 2 years. They haven't beaten any good teams the past 2 years. And so, like, that's what I want to see from them most. If they went 7-5, but beat Arizona State, like, I would view that as progress. I would not view that as success, but I would view that as progress. And right now, I just don't know how much faith that I have that they're going to be able to do that.
I think the worst thing that could happen for Cincinnati this year is for them to have a breakthrough season, because I don't believe Scott Satterfield could sustain it. Like, they'd end up giving him some 4-year extension and then be stuck with him and him going like 6-6 the 2 years after, and them just being like, great. Like, it would be, Scott Satterfield might be the new Neil Brown in the Big 12. Like,
well, the good news is if West Virginia can find the money to get him out of town 1 year later, then. Oh, and by the way, maybe who might be available next year? Maybe Luke Fickell.
Over his dead body. That man will never come near the Big 12. All right, let's talk about the bottom three, the fourth tier, 3 teams: Arizona, Oklahoma State, and UCF. And 3 very, very different situations. You have an Arizona team with a second-year head coach where you look at it and go, I think you may have made a bad hire. You have an Oklahoma State team who just had the most out of nowhere, the most reliable team in the Big 12 conference having an absolute faceplant, which does feel like it's been some time kind of building, and maybe Mike Gundy's luck has run out. Now it's got a completely new coaching staff and a bunch of new faces on the roster and new faces starting. And then you have a UCF who, okay, now we have a brand new coaching staff, a very familiar face at head coach, and an entirely new roster. You look at Oklahoma State and how many transfers they brought in already, and yet still UCF has less returning production than Oklahoma State somehow. I don't know how that's possible, but they do. All 3 very interesting, unique situations. And so I know we don't usually spend a lot of time on like the worst teams. I kind of want to go through each one of these because I think they're very interesting situations.
So I actually want to start because obviously, look, you got a picture of Boone Pickens Stadium in your background right now.
For those listening in audio and don't know who I am.
So here's my thing with Oklahoma State, right? They were bad last year. That's obviously not a secret. They also lost a lot of players who were good. Like, who were good players. And so, like, I think my fundamental question with them is, like, who is the player on the roster who is most likely to be all Big 12 at the end of the year? Because, like, I look up and down this roster, and I'm like, I don't know, there will be somebody, right, who like, obviously pops. But, like, coming into the year, I don't see almost a single player on the roster who is clearly going to be an above-average Big 12 player. because, and again, they brought in some transfers. I think that their transfer class was kind of interesting, and I expect they'll have some guys who pop. But like, Brennan Presley was on this team last year. Ollie Gordon was on this team last year. Colin Oliver was on this team last year. Nick Martin was on this team last year. And now you're going to try to do it without those guys? Like, I don't know. It is just so hard for me to see, unless they just sweep with all of their transfers and all of them hit. Like, I don't know what success looks like for this team even.
It's a very interesting situation for he is the embodiment now of you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And he's been in villain territory from that standpoint for a little while now, and then it got ugly last year. And so he's now playing, look, you get to play lots of cards when you've been there for as long as he has and had the success it has. So like, he replaced his whole staff. I don't think that immediately means if they don't go to a bowl game, he's fired. But I mean, I think if you're Mike Gundy and you want to prove that you're still the right man to be in charge here, it's real progress. I mean, you have to get back to a winning season, even if that's 6-6 with a bowl win, and leaving people with a good taste in your mouth at the end of the year, and showing a couple games where it's the old Mike Gundy back. They win these close games. They find ways to pull it out. You got some stars. These coaching staff changes worked. Great. Because I mean, I think a lot of the position coaches were some really interesting hires, and I think the coordinators were. I'm trying to find a nice word to say.
Remind me who the OC
one else was
again.
That would be Doug Meacham.
No one was. Let's
just say no one was banging
Meacham
down the door
Grantham, right?
to hire the coordinators that Gundy chose.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're gonna have to show that this is gonna work. As far as Big 12, all Big 12, I'll say into the season, Malik Charles, which is going to be tough because there's a lot of good linebackers in the Big 12, would be, if not first, and second team. And look, Oklahoma State always has at least one wide receiver. Now,
that's
ask me who that is, and I'm not sure I can tell you between Dwayne Lofton or Shotomide King or Shamar Rigby. Like, there's
somebody will pop. Somebody will pop. But
the point's valid.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, okay, well, they were also projected to have one of these guys come back, and Deshaun Stribling, and he's not back, right? Like, it's just like all these guys who, like, because I think the thing is, right, like, to be, and we've talked through so many of the top teams in the Big 12 right now, you feel like the way to build a winning situation is to have, and Kansas State is the perfect embodiment of this, is to have solid everything and then a couple of standouts. Mm-hmm. And right now, it seems like the most likely situation, if they succeed, is like Zane Flores is the best quarterback in the Big 12, and he finds a receiver somewhere, and then they just score 70 points per game and win games 70-63, and that's like kind of the plan. Like that, it just like, and again, like, the thing is, it's Mike Gundy, so like, he's done stuff like this before, but like, to me, if you don't have, for example, Oklahoma State in this bottom three, in this bottom tier of the Big 12, you're literally just saying, I mean, Mike Gundy's really good. Like, maybe something will happen. I don't think that there's a whole lot more to bank on that's solid other than that.
What's more likely for Oklahoma State this year? 3-9 or 9-3?
I have to say 3-9, right? And it feels wrong,
right?
It's Mike Gundy. It's Mike Gundy.
We never had losing seasons in
And
Stillwater.
I've had many Oklahoma State fans, fair, like, go say this, say like, oh, well, every year that they think that Mike Gundy's going to be bad, he's good. And I'm like, I get that. And like, it's true. Every single time that they're overlooked, they deliver. This is a hell of a hole, man.
This is different. This is
a hell of a
like,
hole.
We've never seen Mike Gundy replace every single member. Every single member of the coaching staff. If you tell me there's some analysts who are still there and some grad assistants who carried over from last year, fine. I mean, people who have a coaching position, be it coordinator or position, everybody's different. the roster, even with players who came back, the faces you're going to see on the field are so drastically different.
Right.
And this is not a quick fix. This is not they went 6-6 and then they're going to go win 10 games. That's 4-game difference. A 4-game difference from last year is 7 wins.
Right.
And so, but see, to me, like, I would say progress for Oklahoma State is a bunch of your young guys show out and become the names for Oklahoma State, and you see a 4-game improvement.
Yes,
and you're not
that's
getting
what I mean.
blasted.
Because if they're 5-7, but all of their like a lot of young guys who are going to come back hit, like that's fine. But again, that's like maybe success, and that's still missing a bowl game, right? Like that's kind of like the situation where
back-to-back bowl games. Then people can actually start writing back-to-back years missing a bowl game. You can start writing Mike Gundy's on the hot seat stuff.
Well, and that's the thing, right? I think that gets him on the hot seat. I think that if he goes 3-9 again, like that's like that becomes a hard conversation. But like I think that 5-7 with some encouragement at least gets him 26 without too much issue. Now, again, this is not an Oklahoma State podcast, so let's talk about the other teams too. But but yeah, I'm just fascinated by them. You know, it's so let's just to touch on UCF quickly. Like, I don't know what this is, man. Like, I don't know what. Like, it's just they obviously brought in a ton of transfers. Their whole roster is brand new. It's obviously sort of a similar situation where I don't know if any of these transfers are any good. Like there isn't like a whole bunch of guys that you feel especially good about coming in. Obviously, I mean, like this was not a good team last year, and they had RJ Harvey, right? Like, and so I think that they are. Like, I want to be clear. Year zero doesn't really exist in college football anymore with the transfer portal, but like this is as like ground zero a situation as you're going to find in the power conferences. And I think it's interesting, right? Because I don't know that it needed to be this way. I mean, the thing that was interesting to me, like I'll be really interested to see how things work out with Scott Frost, but like this was a pretty sought after job. Like it had a lot of interest. And so I'm just curious, you know, I talked about obviously with Cincinnati, like the sort of lack of identity. Like this roster has no identity right now.
No.
It doesn't have obvious strengths. It doesn't have obvious weaknesses. Now, obviously, at least with the staff, you expect them to develop some strengths and weaknesses because of their history, especially at UCF. But like it is such a random collection of people there right now, and I don't really know, like, again, I don't really know what you can even take from it at this point. This was one of the 2 best jobs open in an off season where there weren't that many open, and I can make a case for it being a better opening than North Carolina. I can't, but that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. I can just because of some of the stuff that feels like it's going on inside North Carolina. That's a lot of internal issues, and I don't like internal strife. Sure. And it's another situation of like, hey, you know who nobody wants? That guy. You better go get him because he can recreate the magic. And shout out to Split Zone Duo, who did a phenomenal breakdown of like coaching rehires and the success or lack thereof that those coaches have had compared to what they had done their first stint at the school. And I just look at this and go, I don't understand it. I don't. It's a little frustrating because the Big 12 for the longest time had done such a mostly good job at making coaching hires that were innovative or creative or came in and helped shape the Big 12. No, not every coach won. Not every coach was a success, but it felt like there was always a really good crop of coaches. And it feels like this last couple cycles, Scott Satterfield, Scott Frost, we can talk about Rich Rod. I mean, I'll say it's a better hire than Scott Frost, absolutely. But I'm still like,
I'm sorry, is Pat White coming out of retirement to play for him again right now? No? Okay. Arizona, who we're going to talk about with Brent Brennan, I'm unenthused by some of what feel like these really scared hires.
Well, I think that that's spot on. And what I'd say with it is, I think that let's just look for a second right at the legacy teams from the Big 12, right? Like the ones that were part of the conference before, because obviously we've added 8 since then.
Right.
I think the legacy teams, and now I think let's put Rich Rod to the side for a second. Like they understand what they're up against as just like a program, right? Like I think that they understand like we got to keep like doing and pushing and you know, and we're gonna have to take chances because we can't really afford to sit on our laurels. Like, and I think that that's how you get some of these hires that have really hit, right? Where you hire an FCS coach who turns into Chris Kleiman, where you hire the Toledo coach who turns into Matt Campbell, and I think that with, you know, and by the way, like the team that I think has embodied this really well of the new schools, obviously, you know, you can point to the Deion Sanders thing at Colorado, but like also Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, I think was a really like creative young hire. They gave him a lot of power, I think. Like, I think it's been really smart. And like you said, the ones that have really kind of been very meh are Cincinnati bragging about the fact that they poached a sitting head coach from a power conference school, right?
Who was happy to see him leave.
Yes, who was thrilled to see him leave and immediately went to a conference championship game, by the way. UCF, by the way, hiring a retread in Gus Malzahn before hiring another retread in Scott Frost. I think that, and then, you know, obviously with Arizona, like, the thing is, and my frustration with Arizona is they hired Brent Brennan, who, like, I defended the hire at the time. I thought it was okay, but it was just okay. But then they asked him immediately to just be Jed Fish. And, like, I don't really get the logic of that. If you're going to hire a coach, like, you gotta let him be him. And you have to understand that, yeah, maybe it'll make Tetairoa McMillan not as happy. Maybe it'll make Jacob Manu not as happy. But, like, you know what happened? You tried to get somebody to come in and essentially be a yes man for your program so that you could keep this great generation of players around, and you still kind of pissed them off, and the only one left now is Noah Fafita. And so, like, if you wanted to do all this, you should have just promoted your offensive coordinator to head coach, right? Like, you should have just actually kept somebody on that staff. So the thing that's interesting about Arizona heading into year 2 is that now this will be a Brent Brennan team, but you kind of put him behind the 8 ball and being able to create his own roster in the process. So you've got this collection of kind of like this kind of weird collection of players who don't really necessarily fit together or know each other, haven't played together. And I don't know, it feels like Brent Brennan was, one, put in a position to fail by how he was hired, and 2, really just does not have what it takes necessarily to dig his way back out of it. Now, maybe they'll pop, I don't know, but like, that's just in the short term what it feels like.
Yeah, I have to wonder if one of the reasons that they hired Brent Brennan is he was one of the few coaches who was like, yeah, I'll just come in and basically run what you want me to run, because I can't imagine many head coaches doing that. And he's a guy who wanted to be there, right? He'd been there before. He was an alum. He wanted to be at Arizona. Like, yeah, this is my dream job. I'll take it. You want me to coach the entire thing from a hospital bed in the press box? I'll do that. You want me to? Sure, I can be the next Larry Coker. I can take this team to new heights. They all feel like bad safe. They just feel like overly cautious safe hires. And I think overly cautious safe hires in college football are killers. Like, you congrats. You might go to bowl games and be 9-4, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, please understand, like, success can be consistently just winning games, but your ceiling is like you've capped your ceiling at not winning 10, 11 games, not winning Big 12 championships even. You're just going to be happy with bowl games. And it will be very interesting to see for a UCF program that we had really high expectations for, given location and youth and excitement and everything coming into this conference, and that they're underneath that Scott Frost hire. And I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Won't be the first time. Won't be the last. It feels like they've set themselves back as opposed to moving themselves forward. And look, I get winning because it's a weird situation where like Scott Frost won the press conference for the people who love Scott Frost, and no one else liked it, which is a weird, like, some people are happy and most people are like, okay, we'll see how that goes.
Well, and I think that, like, on the Frost front too, it's like, okay, let's say that you want to go out and do that. And let's say that Scott Frost really, as an athletic director, makes you believe, like, one, I've learned from it, and two, I understand what's different about this job now than when I had it then. Well, like, I feel like to some extent, especially, by the way, like, UCF is very open about the fact that they have a very young, very online fan base because they're a very young online school, right? Like,
yes.
It's a positive. Like, your whole next 6 months, frankly, should be spent trying to sell this hire nationally, right? Trying to be vocal, trying to be out there on Front Street. I mean, just frankly, right? Like, you should be coming to me and like asking me to like sell your pitch, right? And so like, and I think that, for example, like, I think Rich Rod's tried to do that in West Virginia. Like, I think that he's tried to be very forward about, like,
yes, we're
doing things this way, and we are, like I'm the face, and obviously, look, they have the advantage that they've taken advantage of the Pat McAfee thing, right? Like, they've tried to use that to their advantage in a way that I think is pretty smart. UCF, like, they have to do that, too. I think they have to sell themselves as a program, because look, this is a school that obviously is in the middle of Florida in great recruiting grounds. It's a unique program in the Big 12. It's a unique program in college football. I mean, I've said it before too, right? Like, in the state of Florida, you have these schools, you know, Florida State, Florida, Miami, that are aiming for guys of a certain level. And you can kind of clean up with the guys who are half a step under, right? Like, and have a chance to develop them into great players, and then eventually hit on a John Walker, eventually hit on an RJ Harvey, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just don't, I don't know. I will be really curious to see, because again, with both UCF and Arizona, like, are these guys who are willing to push these programs the way that you need to be pushed? Because Jedd Fisch was that guy who pushed this program the way that it needed to be pushed. And that wasn't a popular hire when it was made, but it was a very forward-thinking hire, even if we didn't necessarily know it at the time. You know, UCF, obviously, like, when Scott Frost was hired, he was an innovative young offensive mind coming off of the Oregon tree, right? Like, that's different than what he is in 2025. And so, again, I'll be fascinated to see. Now, look, they did a story I know UCF did with ESPN, and he talked a little bit about being off the McVay tree now and having learned from him, and, like, you know, maybe he'll be able to use some of these new experiences to his advantage. But I just don't. I think the downside is a lot higher with somebody who is a retread than it is with somebody who at least is going to try to add some energy into your program.
Agreed. Yes. Yes. Agreed. Yeah, I mean, UCF should be calling me to do interviews, and, you know, I'm me. Shehan, everyone should call you for an interview. You do incredible work. Do me a favor. First of all, as always, sir, thank you. It is incredible to be able to chat with you. It's incredible to have access to you, because, like, I know that you come from very humble beginnings, as do us all in this industry. I say in this industry, I just do this for fun. But it's great to have somebody like you representing the Big 12, as knowledgeable as you are, and as don't listen to the haters. Like, it's okay. It's a rankings. Y'all have fun with it. But do me a favor. You do great work. Let everybody know where they can find all of it.
Yeah, you can find all my work over on cbssports.com, and you can follow me on every social media platform at Shehan Jeyarajah.
I know that we're your second favorite podcast behind Scott, and and Bosco's boys. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. I say second, maybe third. I don't know. But enjoy the summer. I know you've got a lot of prepping to do before it gets crazy in July, and we'll have you back on again soon, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Shop the Sherwin-Williams 4-Day Super Sale and get 40% off paints and stains June 6th through the 9th. With prices starting at $29.39, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Shop the sale online or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.